So first, what I think is important to mention is nowadays we arrived at the maturity to be able to evaluate agroclimatic traits. What are agroclimatic traits? Agroclimatic traits are traits that combines at the same time plant data recorded by drones, phenomobiles, or other sensors that take data in the field with climatic data like weather stations and soil data, soil probes, etc. And mixing them together allows you to get agroclimatic traits. I guess the most important one is what we call a QPAR, or the quantity of light intercepted through the season, or the energy that is intercepted for the light use efficiency. We can also mention plant phenology, so to be able to understand when each phenological stage arrives, and of course, water use efficiency. So now on, we're going to focus on concretely how do we manage to mix those data together to be able to have some insights on water use efficiency. Well, I think it's really about an evapotranspiration assessment. So basically, we're able to have an F cover, so a fraction of vegetation on your microplots. By combining it with a water balance model and some consideration about your water availability in the soil, evapotranspiration and transpiration processes, you're able to extract traits about water stress. So let's get a glimpse about this water balance model, how it works. Well, it's quite easy actually. Yeah? It's really about considering that you're having some water availability on your soil, that some of this water is going to go for evaporation, some will be able to be used by the plant for transpiration. This transpiration can be at its maximal potential as long as you have a certain amount of water, then it will lower down because there's not enough water to extract, so you will still have an evaporation, but a transpiration, but less. And finally, you arrive to this wilt point where the plant dies. And so all the game then is to say, okay, how much does it rain? How much does my plant transpirate? How much does my soil evaporate? What are my water loss? And I'm able to seal that. For evaporation and transpiration, we're using really those Monteith equations that are, I guess, quite standard in our field that allows us, by comparing with what would happen with grass, to evaluate the ETP, so the potential evapotranspiration, and we're able to transform the ETP into ETR through the water balance model, and we can discuss that further if you want. And that's really the idea on how, with just some simple drone data and climatic data, we're able to really go much further and give you some information that are comparable across sites and that are really easier to handle it in a massive big data scale. Some concrete examples. Here you can see the example of a plot that had actually a very strong vigor, a very strong initial vigor. This very strong initial vigor meant that you had an F cover that developed fast. So you had some the ETP versus the potential transpiration. So the potential ETP versus the real ETP, and especially on transpiration, was soon starting to split, and you had water stress arriving extremely rapidly. On the other side, this microplot, which had much less vigor, so where the F cover started increasing much later in the season, meant that your transpiration rate were lower, so you match your ETP for much longer, and stresses occurred later in the seasons. So you can really see the difference between those two sites. So that's the theory of this, the way we are managing to compute water stress. Of course, and that's really, really important, that this model tells you that we should have had water stress or not, doesn't mean that the plant stressed, because there's many other processes at play, like the quantity of water availability in the soil, the routes to extract this water availability, the stomatal conditions that can be a little bit different, and that's exactly why you're breeding for those things, which means that actually we need to disentangle was this stress a real stress, or was the plant able to, it should have theoretical stress, but it didn't, and so it's a plant we want to target. For that, we can do canopy temperature assessment. So to look at if the plant is heating or not. If it's heating, it means transpiration is lower because the stomata are closing, and thus that it's starting to stress, or at least that the potential evaporation, evapotranspiration is not rich, and that's so your real transpiration is much lower, which means that yes, it's stressing. You can also look at leaf rolling. So leaf rolling is also another trait that is instantaneous, which is about limiting the F cover, so limiting the surface of transpiration in order to use less water and to be able to increase survivability. There's many other processes we could think about, typically fluorescence or other processes, which we don't yet measure, so but we're working hard on. And then the first step is to say, okay, now that I have those agroclimatic traits, I know my stress and all that, I look actually at what yield I achieve compared to the stresses, to those agroclimatic traits, to look at efficiencies. And there is really those plants that has very strong, even if the plant doesn't have outstanding yield, if they have outstanding efficiencies, I do believe it's those plants you want to select and you want to understand why they're performing so well. So let's go just for a couple of minutes into those examples of instantaneous stress that I really think can complement those water stress assessments we presented to you. The first one is temperature. So temperature is a really, really tricky trait to play with because soil is always much warmer than the canopy. So if you look at the global temperature of your canopy, you will be sensitive actually to the F cover. So lower is your F cover, higher will be your temperature. Higher is your F cover, lower will be your temperature, whatever is the stomatal conductance. So we're working hard on trying to disentangle the soil to the soil's effect from the plant heating up. There's already some papers discussing about that, and I believe that the solutions will come with cameras with higher resolutions. The other point which I contributed for this publication is how can you assess leaf rolling through time. So today there's some digital ways that are as good as manual and visual scoring, and I'm really happy to discuss that in another webinar with you in details. And yeah, and so once we are managing to have all that, is a moment where we say, okay, we did all this work, why not in nurseries and tens of thousands of plots in a really digital way where we use big data, and I managed to find a certain number of cultivars of modalities that are outstanding. What do I do with it? Well, probably the first step will be to validate that it's really outstanding cultivars. Why not with plant detect systems?